as a reporter that writes about this, I see this a great deal myself. It's not simply the registered lobbying, but it's all the work on the side that perhaps is playing the greatest role in influencing the process. And then the lobbyist simply walks in and points to the handiwork of all these affiliated groups, which have been lined up by some of the same funders. But just talk a little bit about what it's like as a U.S. Senator to see the handiwork sort of playing out in a way in which it just creates this appearance of like a groundswell nationally, when in fact it's something that's being coordinated by a relatively small group of players. But just talk to that a bit.
Sure. Let me give a very specific example. I was the United States Attorney in Rhode Island back when the Department of Justice sued the tobacco industry for behaving in a fraudulent fashion in denying that tobacco caused health harm to human beings. So I remember that very well. The government won the case. It was very clear. And I've had that in the back of my mind. So I've been thinking about whether that particular lawsuit brought against the tobacco industry back then should maybe be considered as a model for looking at climate denial and the fossil fuel industry. And I wrote an op-ed to that effect that the Washington Post was good enough to publish. And there was a little pause because I'm not a very prominent senator. I'm not one of the celebrities, and nobody really paid attention very much for a while. But after a couple of days, suddenly, one of the things about being a senator is that you keep track of your press. And so I noticed suddenly over the next couple of weeks that there were more than 50 op-ed pieces that appeared around the country attacking me, attacking this idea, and they all came from the same more or less theory. You could scramble the words around a little bit, but it was essentially a repeat performance, cookie-cutter argument, in many cases with the same authors, and you could, in every single one, trace it back to this machinery of special interest front groups. And it came up with telltale ideas like that there's a First Amendment right of these fossil fuel companies to commit fraud, which is wrong. That's just legally a falsehood. Forever, the First Amendment has ended where fraud began. And so the argument that wasn't the case, or the implication that wasn't the case, was like a telltale sign that this had a kind of a common thread to it. And then it happened again a couple of months later when I provoked them in a different way. So you can actually kind of ring the bell of this network and watch it respond with multiple dozens of apparently independent and apparently legitimate expressions of opinion that are in fact just the beast doing its propaganda work.
What's wrong with that setup to you? Why does that threaten democracy from your perspective?
Because people don't know who it is, right? If it was ExxonMobil saying, okay, this is our opinion and we're going to fight for it. This is Koch Industries, and this is what we believe and what we stand for, which is that we should be able to defraud the public to our heart's content about whether climate change is real. Then we can have that discussion, and you know who the parties in interest are, and the people understand what the circumstance is. When you set up something called the Heartland Institute, which nobody knows what it is, or you set up an institute that is named after the extraordinary American hero George C. Marshall, and you just steal his name, put it on an institute, and march it out as your front group, and you do that 40 or 50 times, you end up with this array of screens that deceive the public as to who is saying this stuff, because it really helps people understand the story when they know who the protagonists are. And if you've been able to hide who the real protagonist is, if they're hiding behind a curtain pulling strings, then the public is deceived, and that is not good for democracy.
So doesn't the left do some of the same things? And I mean, your book doesn't really talk much about Tom Steyer or George Soros or labor unions or environmental groups. And I mean, they all have their own networks of nonprofits that, that have opinion pieces, op-ed pieces. What's different about their operation?
Well, I think two things. First of all, I'm very close to the environmental community, and the first thing that I would say about them, and I say it to their faces, so I'm not speaking out of school here, is that they're just pathetically badly organized. everybody kind of goes off and does their own thing, and it's really rare to get any kind of organization or strategy on an issue. Whereas on the other side, this is all very strategically developed because these are not really legitimately different organizations. They're all just tentacle tips of the same creature. And so they're deployed to create the illusion that it's a lot of different things, but that ain't so. The other big difference is that for environmental groups and for labor unions, they are spending down a scarce resource when they engage in this kind of work. And they've got to run out and try to get donors who believe in their cause to try to fill that resource back in so they can stay in business. On the other side, this is a money-making proposition for these big industries. The International Monetary Fund has said that the fossil fuel industry gets a subsidy in the United States every year of $700 billion, billion with a B. So for that kind of, to protect a subsidy that big, there's an enormous amount of money that you can spend. So it's profitable for the other side to play this game, and our side has to try to find friendly and sympathetic sources to continually replenish their coffers. And that creates a massive unfair advantage. So both in resources and in strategy, the corporate side is miles ahead of us.
But they're using some of the same tactics. But I just wonder why you're not more critical of the...
Well, not really, because, I mean, you know, when LCV, the League of Conservation Voters, does something, it says, look, we're the League of Conservation Voters. Everybody knows who they are. There's nobody behind them other than like a gazillion donors and members who believe in their cause. They're not a front group for a particular corporation or a particular industry. Whereas the George C. Marshall Institute, behind it is like 5 big companies and 5 big foundations, and it's part of an array that they maintain. So you really don't know when somebody from the Heartland Institute writes an op-ed in the local paper who they're there on behalf of. Mm-hmm. When Gene Karpinski of the League of Conservation Voters writes an op-ed in the local paper, everybody knows, okay, that's the League of Conservation Voters. This is an environmental group, we get it. Nothing's being hidden.